Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 18 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. I'm your co-host, Sean Briggs, here with my other co-host, Sam. How you doing, Sam?
I'm okay. I survived watching the animated Lord of the Rings movie.
Yes, the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings, 1978. That is what we will be discussing today. If you haven't read any of the Lord of the Rings books, or seen this film, or seen Peter Jackson's trilogy, you should probably check all of those out, because this movie and this discussion would most likely ruin all of those experiences for you.
Although, to be fair, is it this discussion that would ruin the experience of watching the animated Lord of the Rings movie? Hard to say. I think the filmmakers themselves have a lot to do with ruining that experience.
Yeah, last week, Sam, we talked about the Rankin and Bass animated Hobbit, which came out a year before this film, and I don't even think they're comparable. Like, the Hobbit, animated Hobbit, fantastic film. This one,
yeah.
This one, I had such a hard time getting through it, and I've owned this DVD for, probably 5 years, and I have never watched it because I've heard bad things about it, and then this podcast is what finally put me over the edge to watch it.
Well, I'm sorry.
I could imagine it will be sitting on my bookshelf for another 5-6 years before I even have like a minute desire to watch it again.
I don't know. Those are 2 hours that I don't know if I'll invest the 2 hours once. I don't know about in the future. We should probably get into the specifics about this, but before we do, you said you have it on DVD. You've owned it for about 5 years. Was this the first time you'd ever seen any of it?
Yeah, this is the first time I've ever seen the 1978 animated Lord of the Rings by Ralph Bakshi.
Okay. I remember in high school, my D&D group, one time we were hanging out. And for whatever reason, we didn't want to play D&D, or maybe the DM was a little bit tired or burned out or something like that. And so we were playing Smash Brothers, and I was never very good at Smash Brothers. And I was like, hey, isn't there anything else we can do? Can we watch Lord of the Rings or something? And I think the guy whose house it was like, well, I don't have the Lord of the Rings, the Peter Jackson movies, but we could watch the Lord of the Rings animated. And I was like, oh, okay, I've never seen it. I'd love to see it. And they put it on, and I think some of them had seen it, and eventually like, okay, can we please stop? So I have seen bits and pieces. I don't remember any of it except for the scene at Bree, at the Prancing Pony. The very first, with like all the people stumbling around the inn. Anyway.
I will be able to say I'm going to shit on this movie a lot as we discuss this.
Okay.
But there are a few things that I actually appreciate about this. I was about to say but I'm going to say appreciate.
Okay.
There's decisions that were made that I appreciate, that I like, that they included, that like Peter Jackson didn't include.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. But we'll get to that when we get to it. Do you want to kind of do what we did last time by starting at the beginning and just working through our notes as we go and just go through the whole movie that way?
Yes, with one exception, and that is we have to talk about the visual aspect of this movie.
Okay.
Which is we're calling it, and because it's overarching, and it is seemingly the one of the major creative decisions that impacts this film. And we're describing it as animated, and I don't know enough about the science of filmmaking and animation to say to the extent to which rotoscoping is more of like a hybrid, because there are real actors and you film them doing something, human actors, you film them doing something, and then you overlay on top of that animation.
Yeah, you like trace over the live action shot that you got.
Yes. And I think most people, most casual media consumers will probably be most familiar with rotoscoping from the Aha Take On Me music video, which is an example of rotoscoping. Very extended portions of this movie are shot using rotoscoping. And it is,
Can I say
yeah,
the aha take on me actually did it well though?
sure. Yeah, it
Like,
did it well.
I watch that and I go, oh, that's a interesting music video. I
Yep.
watched this film and whenever they used it, I was like, oh man, this just looks so weird.
Well,
And
in that one, it's in the music video, if I recall correctly, it's kind of used as like a mirror universe type thing, right?
like in a comic book, yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's right. It's right. It's a comic book kind of come to life type situation. In this, the rotoscoping is used. I don't know why. It's not
I
as
know why. I know why.
okay.
Originally, the budget for animating how they had been was going to skyrocket had they had to animate like the battle scenes, Helm's Deep, all
Okay.
of the different characters at the Inn and Bree Prancing Pony. And when you do rotoscope, it made it way cheaper to be
Okay.
able to do it.
I had a suspicion that it was something to do with cost savings. Now, what the end result became was this weird mashup between rotoscoping and then kind of traditional cell animation, where you have fully animated characters. And to me, the combination of the two just resulted in this disjointed, ugly, ugly, ugly movie. I don't know if this was also a cost saving measure, but it seems like the palette for this movie was brown and gray, and that was it. And everything was that the orcs looked like that. All of the background looked like that. Even the human characters during the rotoscoping seemed to have a filter of grayish brown over them. And it was just so terribly ugly. That was for me was the hardest part, was the visual aspect of this movie. And then, we can talk about some of the creative decisions with the script and the adaptation.
No, but totally. And I like the rotoscoping. For me, like we were texting while you were watching it. And for me, it was if the entire film would have been just the traditional animation, my qualms would be way down. I think
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been so offended by the animation had every 45 seconds there's this weird rotoscope character on screen. And there are times like in the Battle of Helm's Deep where like Aragorn won't be rotoscoped, but all of the like Rohan fighters are. And it's
Yes.
so bizarre to see
Yes.
the two. And when I was watching it last night, so I watched the first half rather inebriated, and I think I kind of enjoyed it a little bit more. And then
Yeah.
I watched the second half this morning while sober, and I was like, I think I remember this being a little bit better last night. But the first time we saw one of the Nazgul, they were like rotoscoped the entire time, the Nazgul.
Yeah.
And one of the first scenes where they're like riding towards when they're chasing Frodo, like from Weathertop, between Weathertop and the Fords of Bruinen, I just hated it because Frodo was traditional and all of these Nazgul look like live action people riding through an animated background.
Yeah.
It was so strange.
The thing that got me was a scene during Helm, and I don't know if it was just the continued use of the rotoscoping and the traditional cell animation side by side that just kind of wore me down, or if in the second, really what is the Two Towers book, so that's the other thing we should say, is that this was a combination of the Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers told in one film. So it goes straight from the breaking of the Fellowship through the passing of Boromir, the chapters of Legolas and Gimli and Aragorn tracking Merry and Pippin with the orcs, all the way through Helm's Deep. So the only thing we didn't get was a ton of Frodo and Sam and Gollum. But I guess actually they really did just do everything that was those chapters in the book. So I don't know if it was in kind of the Two Towers chapters where they stepped up the use of the rotoscoping, or if it just kind of eroded my suspension of disbelief, if you want to call it, or just my patience with the movie. But by the Battle of Helm's Deep, I was like, this is just so much crap on the screen.
They ended up using more rotoscope because we got into more battles, and the whole point of
That's
it
what it
was
was.
to
Okay.
reduce the cost of animating those fight scenes. And I know, like, rotoscope, like, this was the first film to like go heavy on rotoscope, and it was like groundbreaking for its time, which sure, but now it's, when you look back at it, it's pretty awful.
Well, the funny thing, so this came out in 78. Star Wars, which at the time was just called Star Wars, now we refer to as, episode 4, A New Hope.
Wasn't it like Star Wars something from the Journal of the Wills originally?
Oh, originally, yeah. I think that
Any Star Wars fans out there, correct us.
it's something about like an entry in the Journal of the Wills or something, like as taken from the Journal of the Wills.
Mm-hmm.
So Star Wars comes out the year before, and talk about groundbreaking filmmaking, right? You, in that movie, you had those I hesitate to say this, but those special effects held up for decades.
Still do.
Yeah. I mean, I have the there's been various remasterings and things like that. I'm not talking about the special editions. I'm talking about the actual remasters of the original cuts. Like, still really, really good. If this was groundbreaking in 78, it was just because this hadn't been done before and people maybe thought it was cool, and then quickly like, oh, this is terrible, because I don't think rotoscope has been used much beyond this. I will say that there was one other Ralph Bakshi film that I watched. It was called Ice and Fire. Are you familiar with this?
I am not.
No? It was a collaboration between Ralph Bakshi and Frank Frazetta, who Frank Frazetta is a famous like pulp fantasy illustrator, a lot of Conan, a lot of is it John Carpenter? Not that, he's the film director. Who's the guy that's on Mars? Is it also John Carpenter? Prince of Mars?
You keep talking, I'll Google.
Okay, you go. Anyway, and so they used rotoscoping in that, and it was fine. Like, that was, I think, an original story that they created, but they used some rotoscoping, I believe. It was not nearly as jarring. The thing that I think the eventual thing, what is it?
John Carter.
Okay, John Carter, Prince of Mars, which was adapted into a terrible Disney movie. That it was at the Battle of Helm's Deep, where you had all of the orcs that were the rotoscoping, and then you had Aragorn and you had Legolas, and they stood out because at that point too, it seems like they were trying to save money on just the overall animation budget, because there's no detail in their character models whatsoever. They're just big chunks of color. Legolas is white and Aragorn is like his browns, right? And it was so jarring and bad. Anyway, the visual nature of this film was disgusting.
Hard to stomach, for sure. And, when I was looking back at the film and how it like performed, it did really well. Like, it got out of a budget of like $6 million. It grossed like 33 million at the box office, but it was not received very well at all. Hence why they talk about this being the first part at the end of the film, and then part 2 never arrived.
I wonder if the Tolkien estate, which at that point, when did J.R.R. Tolkien pass away? Was it 72?
73.
73. So he passed away in 73. So this is 6 years after his passing. I cannot recall when. I think it was when he was alive, he sold the rights for film adaptation to the Saul Zaentz company. If I think I'm remembering all this right. And I wonder if there was any sort of feedback from the estate about the nature of this movie. But yeah, I can see why they didn't get a second half, because it was, maybe it was groundbreaking initially. This would have been the first time that the Lord of the Rings would have been adapted into a visual medium. Obviously, we had The Hobbit the year earlier, but I don't see people really. I don't know. One of the things that got me was the Balrog.
Oh,
right. We can transition into kind of the natural progression of the story, but let's take a second and make sure that we talk about the Balrog.
The Balrog is rotoscoped, so it was legit a large man with like a lion head. And in my notes, I wrote, the Balrog is so fucking funny. It looked so out of place.
Yeah, it looked so out of place. It was just one of those things where animation allows you to do so many things. It doesn't. The biggest takeaway for me is I can't see anything. all of the action scenes are this weird dark. It's like the cinematographer took the entire film off and was like, people who are watching this don't actually need to see anything. And maybe that's a part of the rotoscoping, but then just, I don't know. It was the Balrog was such a great summation of all this because it looks terrible. The scene itself is poorly set up, and it's like it's not foreshadowed at all. There's no discussion of what this is or why it's important or why we should care. And then it happens and it's over with. And it was just such a cool scene in the movie. That's such a great scene in the book. And here it's just the thing that happens because, I guess we got to include this because it was in the novel.
Mm-hmm. And we have to have Gandalf die.
Yeah. And even then, anyway, we'll get to the specific critique of the adaptation. Anything else, any sort of like meta commentary? I have one more, if I may.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing is animation, and it was a critique of, I just feel like the animators couldn't get the eyes right on any of the characters. Galadriel's eyes are enormous. Aragorn's eyes are tiny. And as you go through and look at him, yeah, it's just bizarre.
What we really need to do to illustrate this to our listeners is to get a screen grab of Legolas, especially when he's first introduced, because his eyes are so strange. It's as if the animators took the regular orientation of an eye and then rotated them just enough so that he looks like a really strange doll. And that's the defining feature of Legolas. Everything else about him is completely generic.
And there's very few other elves that have that look. Like yes. Galadriel has very round, big eyes. Elrond looks like a man. He looks exactly like Aragorn does. So yeah, it's bizarre why they went that route with Legolas in particular.
I don't know. That was shockingly bad. The other thing I will say, just the visuals for the entire movie are a negative. To me, the music, there's no overture, there's no theme. The music is very generic. There is, I believe, there's the one song that they sing in Lothlorien. I should know this better because I have read that chapter relatively recently, but I think it's not a perfect adaptation from the novel. And then you compare that to, obviously, the Lord of the Rings films with Peter Jackson. The score is incredible. And then we just talked about it last week with the Hobbit animated. They take the songs right from the book, put great music to it, and those punctuate the various scenes in a perfect way. And here we had the same generic suspense music just reused over and over and over again. There was no kind of grand epic fantasy type music. And I'm not going to say you had John Williams because I have no idea what the budget was for this movie, but it's not as if it was completely unprecedented for actual scores to be used for movies that are telling kind of fantasy stories. Anyway, so the visuals and the music, terrible. Let's move into a just discussion of the film as the plot progressed.
So the movie starts just like the Fellowship of the Ring, Jackson's first installment, with a prologue that talks about the founding of the rings, great battle. It follows through Isildur losing it. It even goes into Smeagol and Deagle finding it, Smeagol killing Deagle, and Smeagol becoming Gollum. And then that leads us into Bilbo finding it, and the events of our movie begin to take place. Now, I will say, it's almost like the prologue in particular, they did the rotoscoping without animating it. So they took a bunch of live action shots and made it look like it was all shadows behind like a linen screen.
Yeah.
And to go straight from that to animated Bilbo at his birthday party was so jarring to like begin the movie that way. And I just wrote weird live action intro, didn't like it. I liked that the prologue was similar. And I mean, you mentioned in one of our discussions that Jackson pulled a lot from this, like a lot of the visuals, at least, like the scenes.
There were some memorable visuals that he pulled. I think he probably rightly recognized that there are some like, oh, that's just a good idea, regardless of how it's shot. But I don't know if I said a lot, I certainly should go back on that. There were a handful of memorable occurrences that I think he pulled.
Yeah, and as I go through the notes, I'll just say one now, but there's two in particular in the very beginning of the movie. The proud feet scene is, if you put Jackson's still and this still of the animated movie, they're exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
And then the hobbits hiding underneath the log as the Nazgul comes up and is sniffing for them. That's another. It looks exactly the same.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think we did, but the proud feet moment is also in the book.
It is, but
I mean, and I think Tolkien describes his large and rather hairy feet like prominently displayed on the table. So it might have been just a cue of, oh, you can do something cool with that. The shot is very similar, yes, but it's not as if
it's not very similar. It's the same shot. That's why, like, you could have done something else with that shot to show that his feet were on the table. It's the same exact angle, looking at his feet and seeing him in the background. Definitely, you could have.
So
done
what you're
something
saying
else.
is Peter Jackson's a hack. Just kidding.
I was going to say, yeah, in some instances.
I mean, some of those things is kind of also I would interpret that as an homage in a certain sense to the people who came before you. This film was not without risk, right? We're obviously shitting on it, but we have the hindsight of, over 40 years and this great live action trilogy that for us can be the way that Lord of the Rings is visually represented. But for a lot of people, fans of the novel and the story, this was all they had for however long.
45 years ago.
Wow. Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
So the one thought I had on the prologue is they changed some of the ring lore seemingly nonsensically, and just mentioning how not mentioning that Sauron was involved in the creation of the other rings.
They basically say Sauron learned to make a ring as well.
Yeah, it's like, you don't need, again, don't change it if it doesn't matter. I did see there was some pretty clear influence on Jackson. The first thing that jumped out to me was how, even though this was just the live action shot through a filter to make it look all like shadows, even then there's not a high amount of production value in the shadows. It all looks really cheap. Just the costuming, the things that you can tell people are wearing, even shown in shadow, just looks really bad. And then I think the other thing that got me is we jump from there into the party. And this is another common occurrence related to my overall critique of the visuals in the film. The establishing shots are just, you could have taken the time to create, I won't even say high definition, but just something that doesn't look completely dirty and messy. But all of the shots of Hobbiton and Bree or wherever else just looks so rushed and mushy. It's
there's no detail. Yeah.
There's no detail, and you don't need to go crazy, but it's still like, one thing I love about The Hobbit animated is that there are details. You can even, down to the lines of grain on the wood in Bilbo's door. You can see that even if it's just a still shot of Bag End. But here, everything is kind of muddied together, and there are a lot of scenes which just look like they threw some grays and browns on the screen, and then maybe a little tiny bit of effort was put into putting a skull there in the bottom to show that this is, the dead marshes, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. And another instance where I noticed it as well is when at the Council of Elrond, when Sam shows up and then he lays down on something.
Mm-hmm.
He's laying down onto like just a silvery gray background, and he like sits on something and you can't tell, and then he leans backwards and is leaning against something, but it's legit just like a gray and silver background.
Yeah.
So there's no chair, there's no like step. He's just like leaning into the ether, and it's so strange.
There was a scene, and again, we're kind of getting a little out of order, but during the end of Helm's Deep, where the orcs are using a battering ram, obviously because of the way animation is done, the orcs, that's a rotoscope of a bunch of actors, and they are swinging a log, and the background against which they're then superimposed is misaligned. So it looks like the battering ram is just hitting against a brick wall, and then behind the rotoscoped actors is the actual gateway that they should be smashing down. It was just so many occasions where, why does it look like that? Can we put a little bit more effort into making this visually an effective storytelling technique.
Mm-hmm. All right, jumping back up to where we were. We go from the birthday party to Bag End with Bilbo and Gandalf, Bilbo trying to leave. And this is where I wrote the writing. And I had similar problems with The Hobbit from last week, where because you're trying to condense it so much, you're missing a lot of like motivation for certain things. And
Or relationships between people. It's not at
or
all
relationships,
established that Bilbo and Gandalf are friends
or that Frodo and Bilbo even like each other
or know each other. They have no scene
yeah.
together. Yeah.
Until Rivendell, yeah. But in the instance with Bilbo and Gandalf, like I wrote, to go from Gandalf asking Bilbo to leave the ring, he all of a sudden just switches and becomes angry. Like, you want it for yourself. Like, there's no.
I wrote Bilbo goes straight to crazy.
Yeah, there's no motivation to be crazy. He just like is crazy. And as we go through like the whole movie, there's a lot of those instances where, because you're trying to condense something that's so long into something so short, yeah, you're missing out. Like, I don't believe Bilbo would be that upset that quickly. And even like, yeah, I don't know. So
if you're worried about saving time, take it from your incredibly boring shots of the Uruk-hai running across a boring landscape
for 2 minutes.
For 2 minutes, it's like that's and you're cycling the same music. You're just overdubbing it again and again and again. It should be, and this is what I think. This was kind of one of my issues, I guess, maybe with the Lord of the Rings show on Amazon, which is I don't know, maybe this is the wrong comparison, but just this movie, if you needed more time, take it from the boring shots that go way too long and flesh out the details a little bit, and then just put a little bit more effort into the script writing. It just felt so repetitive, and the pace. The other note that I wrote about this, I think it's actually Gandalf talking to Bilbo, or Frodo rather, is the pacing is terrible. There's no sense of build up to something. It just happens.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of that, like things just happening, and like cut scenes where they'll go from one place and then all of a sudden be in another place.
Yeah. Or like reference things that didn't actually happen. Like the next thing because after Gandalf convinces Bilbo to leave the ring, Bilbo then leaves. And then we get a 17-year later title card, and the passage of time is indicated by the very rapidly changing scene.
The seasons
changing. It only changes 3 or 4 times, but it's meant to be 17 years. Gandalf comes back, goes crazy, confronts Frodo now about the ring. Then they're going for a walk and discussing what's going to happen, and then just pulls Sam out of a bush for no reason. It's not established that Sam was in there to begin with. We haven't even met Sam at this point. We don't know that Sam and Frodo are friends. And then very quickly after that, there's a mention of the elves, about how Sam says, "Oh, I'm going to go see the elves now." But they don't mention the elves at all up to that point, and only after that do they mention, "Oh yeah, you should go to Rivendell." And so it's just, if you're going to adapt a story, you're rewriting the dialogue, you can at least make sure it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And there's one thing that we skipped over that I had when Gandalf is talking to Frodo about the ring. Gandalf holds the ring.
Yeah. I noticed that too.
He picks it up.
I was like, does Gandalf ever touch the ring? No, he doesn't. He wouldn't.
No, because when Frodo's like, "Here, take it," and Gandalf's like, "No, I dare not like touch it." And in this, he's like just picking it up, holding it, throwing it into the fire. Galadriel won't even take it. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Really strange.
I mean, we get in the book, we get an explanation for a little bit of an explanation for why it did take so long for Gandalf to realize that that Bilbo's ring was the ring of power. And here he just comes in and immediately just assumes that it is.
There's no, I'm not going to Minas Tirith to do research.
Yep.
I'm not trying to find Gollum to like gather more intel.
They don't even do the throw the ring in the fire to look at the script, which is
well, he throws it in the fire for sure.
And then he says it's quite cool.
Yeah.
And there's no discussion of the script. He just starts reading he just starts saying, not reading, but saying the One Ring inscription. what we know to be an inscription, but it's not mentioned that, oh, this means that this ring is the ring of power. It's
no, I'm just pointing it out because you're only half right.
Well,
You said they didn't throw it into the fire to see the script. They threw it into
which
the
is
fire.
That's the only, he threw it into the fire, but then that's the setup for the reveal that this is the ring, the confirmation, which is done so very well in the Jackson films. And here they're set up with no payoff.
Mm-hmm.
He just says, "Oh, the ring is quite cold."
Yeah.
Anyway,
then we have a scene of Gandalf going to Isengard, goes to Orthanc. So, before I say that, I wrote down Frodo looks so much goddamn taller than everyone else in terms of hobbits. Did you notice that? Sam, Merry, Pippin are all the same size. Frodo is like, they all come up to his shoulders.
Like Frodo, Merry, and Pippin are the exact same model too. The only difference between them is the hair color, which is so frustrating because, again, you then also don't introduce Merry and Pippin. You reference them, but you don't. It's not established which one is which when they first appear on screen.
Well, even that, like, there's a scene in Moria where Pippin, leaning over the well, drops the stone in. His hair is like light brown, blondish.
Yep.
A second later, Gandalf talks to Pippin again, and his hair is like dark brown. And I'm like, is that Merry?
Yeah.
And then he calls him Pippin, and I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like so lost.
Yeah. Again, I get it. You don't have two different actors that are easily that are not identical twins. But I don't know, man. Do something to indicate that one is Merry and one is Pippin. Mm-hmm. I also, just real quick on the portrayal of the hobbits, the thing about Frodo being bigger, now that you say it, I recognize it, but it didn't stick out to me at the time. The thing that got me was how ugly Sam is. For seemingly no reason. I mean, Sam is supposed to be younger and a little bit more innocent and very dedicated to Frodo, his loyal friend and servant, but we don't get that. Sam just kind of seems like an ugly doofus.
Yeah, he definitely, they did Sam dirty in this movie.
Yeah,
for sure. He just looks like a small ugly farmer that just follows him around.
Anyway,
so Orthanc looks so evil. Like,
I wrote Orthanc sucks.
like they walk in, or Gandalf walks in, and there's legit like a doorway that looks like a skull. And I'm like, Gandalf, how do you not realize that Saruman's evil?
Yeah.
And they pronounce it Aruman. Did you notice that?
I did. So I wrote this down. I was like,
there's no S. They take the S off of Saruman.
They do. And however, I usually watch this stuff with closed captions on, and in the closed captions, it says Saruman. But in the dialogue of the movie, they're always saying Aruman. And I think I recall reading that they changed it from Saruman to Aruman so that people wouldn't confuse Sauron and Saruman.
That's stupid.
Yeah, I mean,
because when it happened,
if you're worried about people being confused about that, they're going to be confused about everything else that you're doing that is poorly executed.
Yeah, because the first time they did it, in that first scene where Gandalf goes to Orthanc, he says Aruman, and I was like, okay, maybe he just pronounced it weird and I missed it. But then they do it again, and I was like, whoa, no, they're legit saying Aruman.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. And legit, when they were in there, I was like, this place looks evil. Like, how does Gandalf not realize that?
Yeah. There's like a pillar being held up by 4 carved figures with like wailing or like open, anguished looks, which, if you visually want to represent Orthanc as an evil place, okay.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah, you did it, but you did it before the reveal of
him being evil
as an evil character. And it's also just not true to the nature of Orthanc. Like, Orthanc was a fortress famously built by the Númenóreans. Mm-hmm. I'm actually rereading The Lord of the Rings right now, and I just last night finished the book 3, which is the 2 towers up to the Battle of Helm's Deep and them recovering the Palantir, basically. And Tolkien goes out of his way to describe Orthanc, and it's not this weird, massive amalgamation of things. It's very much as was depicted in the Peter Jackson films. It's made of a sleek, almost oily black rock. The top of it does have the kind of 4 horn type protrusions, but the top of it is flat. It's not this. That animation really looked a lot like what we saw as Barad-dûr in the Jackson trilogy.
Mhm.
and that it looks it you know it if a building can look evil, it looked evil.
It totally did. I will say in one of the scenes, I liked that they finally gave us. Well, okay, so I got to get to that point. They started off by Saruman having red robes,
Yep.
and he's supposed to be Saruman the White,
Mm-hmm.
and Gandalf just goes with it, and then all of a sudden he's Saruman of many colors. But I wrote Saruman the Red question mark, like, why change his color from white to red? And the whole point of many colors was he opens up the white robe and then
It's revealed. Yeah.
it's revealed. But I don't know. I just didn't like it.
Well, did you notice that when they started their wizard fight or whatever, a little person ran over and gave Aruman his staff? Which, and now that I don't really want to do this, but one could go back and see, was that Grima?
It could have been, yeah.
Yeah, and then his staff is strangely thick.
I wrote it's like a goddamn tree trunk.
Yeah, it's like staffs are supposed to fit in one's like closed, clenched fist, not like open it and have to like palm it like a basketball.
He needs to two-hand that thing just to grasp it,
or whittle it down to the little
just the handle.
Yeah. And then I wrote my two notes for this scene are Orthanc sucks, because like you, I agreed that the portrayal of the building was ineffective. And then Saruman animation sucks. I was like, the way that they portrayed the magic in that scene was so bad. You didn't know what was happening exactly. Mm-hmm. And then I was gonna say,
I will say though, in terms of the magic usage at Helm's Deep, I did enjoy that the fire of Isengard wasn't portrayed as a bomb like it is in Jackson's, that it was actual like magic from Saruman. I would have preferred that in Jackson's instead of, all of a sudden, I guess Saruman invented black powder.
Yeah.
Like that seems so out of it.
I wrote that down too. It's kind of like it's the idea of a fireball, right? A magical fireball. And that was fine. And that was also good because I think one thing that I didn't like about the animation of the magic in the Gandalf's Saruman fight was that it seemed like the quote unquote animation was actually just some like visual, like a prism type reflections that were just inserted into the animation as opposed to actually drawing out magical fireballs or whatever. So just look it there was a dissonance between the styles of animation on the screen at the time.
Okay, our next scene, we cut back to the hobbits as they are trying to get away from the Shire and into Bree. We come across our first Nazgul at this time. And I'll say, when the Nazgul isn't rotoscoped, I thought it worked really well. Because in the beginning, when it's the one Nazgul by itself, and they're hiding underneath the log, and it kind of like walks like a zombie, kind of.
I wrote Ringwraith zombie. Yeah.
Yeah, it was creepy. I thought it was actually pretty well done. And then after Weathertop, they become rotoscoped the entire time, and it lost me. Yeah. So if they would have stuck with the animated version that they had at the beginning of the movie throughout, I think it would have worked a hell of a lot better than it did.
Yeah, that would have been better than what they did. I still don't necessarily like the zombie portrayal, like just the way that they walk and their kind of staggered gait. They're supposed to be wraiths. They're supposed to be kind of invisible, wispy creatures, not creatures of flesh that have a hard time moving around. But if they wanted to portray it as this is how we're showing that these things are twisted and evil, it was effective.
But we do get that wraith-like feature later on, though, when they attack the inn. They don't bust through the door like they do in Jackson. They like apparate and just like appear in the hobbit's room when they go to stab them.
Yeah. And before then too, we also get the Black Breath when when Mary collapses, which is something that was completely excised from the Jackson film, that entire encounter.
We're in Bree now, and a rotoscope for the other patrons at the Prancing Pony. So bad. You mentioned just earlier.
Absolutely terrible.
Yeah, just bad.
No,
go ahead.
Well, so one of the other things I wrote down was that they used little people actors in the rotoscoping. But then they also had people commenting on how short Frodo was as a hobbit. which is he wouldn't be remarkable in that sense.
No, he would look big compared to all the other hobbits.
Yeah, it was a really weird. Again, they didn't put a lot of effort into the script. You don't need to, because you don't need to have a bunch of drunk people staggering around the freaking Anne of the Prancing Pony.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I wrote down in this scene, men still don't wear pants. That's a carryover from the last episode, the animated Hobbit. Like Aragorn and Boromir, both of them, they're wearing tunics. So when we talked about the Hobbit, we talked about the view that dwarfs must have when they're coming out of the barrels, looking up at the Lake Town men.
Uh-huh.
But there is a scene in this one where Aragorn gets like hit in the Mines of Moria and falls a certain way. And there's an upskirt shot of Aragorn, and he's wearing like either underwear or some really short shorts, but I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my God.
They didn't have the gall to animate some twig and berries floating around. Yeah. We should say too that the people who made this movie chose to remove the Old Forest and Tom Bombadil and the Barrow, which famously were also not included in the Peter Jackson films. I would say to me, the only thing that gets me is that we then don't have an explanation of why Mary was able to stab the Witch King and kind of undo the spells. And that's very clearly explained in the book, that it was an artifact of that dagger being from Numenor and kind of the descendants of Numenor. Yeah.
Well, and the wars against the Witch King.
Yes, specifically. We don't get that. I mean, Tom, I understand that it'd be weird to have both the Old Forest and Tom Bombadil included. It would just add additional time, but it was in the original book that people love. So it was there because it mattered to Tolkien.
Yeah. I wrote Aragorn is actually carrying Narsil, unlike the Peter Jackson movies. Yep. I prefer that. And in this scene, when Barlam and Butterbur is trying to apologize to Frodo.
Wait, what did you just call him?
Barlam and Butterbur?
Oh, I thought you called him Butterman Barlaber. That's what I heard.
I may have. Barlam and Butterbur. What did I say?
I don't know. Well, we have it recorded. You can go back and listen.
Not if I edit it out.
Oh, damn
it. So, and if I did, if you're listening to this and it sounds like it was a little choppy there, I edited it out and I fucked up and I messed up, but that's okay. In this scene, that is where Aragorn says, by life and death, I can save you. I will. He says that at the inn instead of Rivendell, like Jackson's trilogy. That's just a little one side note that I caught there.
Yeah, I caught that too. And I don't recall in the book where he says that line, if he says it as word for word, I think in that way.
If he does say it, I'm almost positive it's Rivendell.
Okay. I do like the insult that we get from Aragorn to Butterbur when he says, who else are they going to turn to for protection? Some fat innkeeper who only can't remember his name, but for people shouting at him all day.
Which I think is from the book.
It is from the book. Totally.
Direct line from the book.
Yeah.
I will say Jackson's movie, if Strider said that, I feel like that would have been a little too jarring. Yeah, so maybe it's a good thing. There's times in the books where Aragorn comes off as too pompous, and I feel like this is one of those lines where he kind of comes off as a little pompous.
Yeah, this is him being directly rude to somebody. There are some other scenes too where I think he talks about how there are things not a day's journey from here that would freeze you in your sleep or something, like basically referencing how he protects the people of Bree without them knowing, and there are dangers in the wilderness that you can't even comprehend. Little things like that to kind of, but I think at that he's also trying to impress the hobbits with his own abilities and drive home to Butterbur that he is a little bit more than just this kind of vagabond ranger.
Yeah, but you don't got to be a dick about it.
Yeah, it's true. Listen, he grew up in the woods. He's feral, basically.
He's feral. Raised by Wolves. As we progress from Bree, we have the scene at Weathertop. I actually didn't really have any notes for Weathertop because we've already talked about how the rotoscoping Nazgul looked weird. Frodo gets stabbed. And then when they're making their way to Rivendell after the stabbing, again, it's not Glorfindel.
You never get Glorfindel, do you?
Like, why are people doing Glorfindel so dirty?
It's because he's hard to explain. It's like, oh, there's this other elf that's like this really powerful guy, but he won't go on the journey. It's a little too like Tolkien.
You don't even have to. Just say that he's like an elf who lives in Rivendell.
Oh yeah, he could be any of the elves that work for Elrond. Yeah.
You don't have to go into detail about why he's so special. Just say that he's Glorfindel. You don't need to say that it's Legolas like they do in this movie, which is bullshit.
Yes.
But anyway, I'm over that now.
This is where I first wrote down that Legolas looks like a sock puppet.
He does.
Also, Legolas voiced by.
I thought you were just. Oh, I thought you were just going to tell me.
I will tell you if you don't know.
For people listening, he asked that question, and I just was looking around my room,
littering and.
Yeah, I have no clue. I looked at the names when I was watching it, but none of them really stood out to me. So I said, I'm done with that.
This was the only name that stood out to me. The voice of Legolas is Anthony Daniels.
Like C-3PO?
C-3PO. This was the year after Star Wars.
Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah, I think the only other name is John Hurt, who was Aragorn. John Hurt, famously English actor. He was the guy who's the first casualty in Alien, and someone who dies in a lot of the movies in which he is in.
Just like Sean Bean.
It's very similar, yeah. Okay,
Rivendell.
Yeah, so Legolas is a weird sock puppet, and then during the pursuit of Frodo, I wrote down the Witch King uses the Force. At one point,
yes,
he uses a little bit of magic to like stop the horse from running or doing something to Frodo. Yeah, this is where I wrote down laziest fucking script. It's like there's just I don't know, maybe it's actually less the script and more the voice acting, but the Nazgul just don't sound otherworldly enough. Yeah, there's a come back to Mordor.
He's like, no, you go back.
I thought the flood of when the waters of Bruinen rise up, that was actually pretty good.
Yeah, that was cool. They made them look like horses, which was nice.
Mm-hmm.
Once we get into Rivendell, this is one of the first times that I noted something good. We got more of Bilbo doing like the poetry in the one room of the lore room.
The Hall of Fire.
Yeah. So I liked that. That was nice. That's something that I wish they would have included more in Jackson's.
Oh, and you did also have Aragorn telling the story of Beren and Luthien, which maybe you get that in the extended version of Lord of the Rings.
I think you do.
Okay, but I don't think that was in the theatrical release, and if so, it's not really mentioned that much. But of course, that's
it happens when Strider's alone with them, and there's a scene in the extended edition where Aragorn's like singing to himself at night, and then Frodo wakes up and he's like, "What's that?" And then he goes, "Oh, it's
that's right.
lay of Beren and Luthien."
That's right.
Go back to sleep.
All right, so we Frodo and Bilbo are reunited in the Hall of Fire. Bilbo was doing some of his poetry stuff, and then we pretty quickly move to the Council of Elrond. What stood out to you during the Council of Elrond?
Sorry, one thing before Council of Elrond, it's Frodo, Bilbo, and he goes, "Do you have the ring?" And Frodo goes, "Yes." His like corruption scene where he's like this. I can't really.
You can't really explain that, but
he's like trying to fondle something, and it doesn't like. I love Ian Holmes where he jumps out at it.
Yeah,
like that's great. This was like a weird. Think of like a donut on a string, and someone with a blindfold on trying to eat it. You remember those games when you were in like middle school?
I wasn't allowed to have donuts.
Well, if you're a listener, and maybe that's a good visual for you, but it was a really strange way to show that he was being like corrupted by the ring.
Yeah, this is perhaps an area where having a novel explain things and then having live action movies and actors and music to indicate the state of somebody's state of mind is so much more effective than animation. This is an example of how animation done cheaply and done poorly and just, maybe somewhat lazy filmmaking. You don't really, these things are not effective. They're just weird. So it's like you get the sense that Bilbo wants to see the ring, but it comes off in a really weird way. Whereas the Ian Holm thing was scary, and it was scary to Frodo, and it was obviously disturbing to Bilbo in the Lord of the Rings film. And then similarly, think about like the kind of slow change in Boromir was done really well in the book and done really well in the animated film, or excuse me, in the live action film. In the animated film, Boromir just kind of all of a sudden one is like, give me the ring, Frodo. And there's no build up to it. And again, it's hard because it's like you could see in Sean Bean how tortured he was. The Sean Bean's portrayal of Boromir, you could see it kind of weighing on him, and the ring.
And even after he tries to take it, his reaction to him like failing,
is
like phenomenal.
He's like starts crying, and there's like snot coming out of his nose, and it's really and you can say like actually remorseful, and that scene that he has with Aragorn is great. Anyway, but like things like that are very hard to do well if you are animating cheaply and you don't invest a lot in voice act. There were so many occasions where they'd go to like a Frodo reaction shot, and it was just him with his mouth open, like again. This is a podcast, so our expressions are not coming through very well.
Maybe someday we'll do a video and post that too. But
give me a heads up on that, so I can either
take a shower,
or put my hat on. Hey, I'm in the middle of a 3-day weekend, people. Okay.
Yeah. So you asked me about Rivendell. I'll say the first thing that I noted during that council was. I'll just go through all of them quick because there's only 3 things that I wrote. The first one is Boromir looks like a fucking Viking.
I wrote Boromir the Barbarian.
Like what the... I wish they would have done a second one so we could see more of Gondor. And if it's just like a Viking Valhalla episode, I don't know. It was a little strange. There's barely a distinction between many of the elves and men. Like Elrond looks exactly like Aragorn, like there's no way to tell he's an elf. And then you get the weird, like Legolas looks way different as an elf, and maybe that's the portrayal of like high elves and like the Sindarin wood elves. I don't know, because we got that difference with the animated Hobbit, and maybe this is similar to that. So
when we watch the animated Return of the King, we will see how the Rankin and Bass animators choose to portray Legolas.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. And then my last thing was when they had like a big view of the whole table, there's only one dwarf, and it's Gimli, and he's so hard to tell that he's a dwarf from all the other characters. Yeah. He's so tall. He's barely shorter than Legolas and Aragorn. He just looks like a man. And the only way you would know he's a dwarf is the scene when they're like announcing the company. They say, and the dwarf Gimli. But otherwise, you would have no idea that he's a dwarf.
And this is an area where who these people are at the Council of Elrond could be considered to be important. And you can use this to, as they did in the Peter Jackson films, and as Tolkien does in the book, the Council of Elrond is a great way to like get in some of your exposition. Now, granted, in the film, some of that needs to come in the prologue. However, why don't you take 30 seconds of your really boring and ugly rotoscope ring wraiths pursuit scenes and give us a little, like, just turn the camera around the table and show us who's here and who they are, right? Just say, oh, Gimli, son of Gloin. And is it Gloin come to the council as well? Right? It's Gloin and Gimli.
Yeah, Gloin's there because he talks to Bilbo.
That's right. Yeah, and
he talks to Frodo, and then Frodo's like, oh my gosh, are you Gloin from the company? And then they talk about the events of the Hobbit.
Yeah.
There's 5 or 6 dwarves that go, not just Gimli and Gloin.
Yeah. So you could have taken a little bit more time to explain who these people are. I thought Elrond didn't speak nearly enough for the fact this is the Council of Elrond and he's the lore master. Also, he looks ugly. I don't know why they chose to. He is supposed to be an immortal elf, and not just that, but the descendant of literally the most attractive people that ever walked the face of Middle Earth. He's not some wrinkle bag who's like sitting there like he's waiting to melt. The portrayal was so terrible. The animation, I should say.
I mean, yeah, Hugo Weaving is an attractive man, so they did good on that acting or that casting. But as we look, like we go straight from Rivendell, they announce that they have to destroy it. We have the scene, which I like from the books, where Bilbo's like, okay, I'll do it. And everybody's like laughing. I wish we would have gotten more of that sincerity of Gandalf, where he's like, oh, he's like sincerely and lovingly like, no, it's okay, Bilbo. In this movie, Gandalf was like a dick to Bilbo when Bilbo's like, I'll do it. And Gandalf's like, oh, sit down or something like that. Like they're supposed to be best friends. And like Gandalf loves Bilbo. Why would Gandalf talk like that to someone who's 128 years old at this point?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's stupid. So we get that. They announce the company, and all of a sudden there's a cut shot and they're at Caradhras very quickly.
They never say Caradhras. They don't even say trying to cross the mountains. They're just there.
There. Yep.
Yeah.
So we have that. We have the snow, and then they say, oh, we got to go back. And then all of a sudden, boom, they cut and they're at the gates of Moria.
Immediately in front of the gates of Moria.
Yep.
Yes.
As we look, we get the Watcher on the water, and they fucking kill off Bill in this one.
Yeah, I wrote that too. I wrote Bill the Pony, exclamation point.
Bill gets eaten.
Bill, yeah, it's implied that Bill is eaten by the Watcher in the water.
Not just implied. There is a tentacle. As they're going into the door, they cut back to Bill standing there by himself, not running from this monster.
Yeah, which you think he would.
Yeah, and a tentacle reaches down and is about to grab him, and then they cut to Moria, and it's like, that's really fucking dark. Like, what the hell?
I don't know. If you reread the book, which again, I'm in the middle of doing that right now, the relationship between Sam and Bill the Pony goes a long way to show the humanity of Sam and how sensitive and caring he is. And like, they do also go out of their way to talk about how Bill the Pony is like smarter than he looks, and Gandalf is like, don't worry. He like reassuring. Again, it also helps portray Gandalf as somebody who cares deeply about these hobbits, who recognizes that, they're afraid and reassures them. And even if it's just blowing smoke, it's like, no, Bill will be fine. And then guess what? In the book, Bill the Pony is fine. He's been hanging out in Rivendell.
He makes it back to Rivendell.
Yeah.
Once they get into the Mines of Moria, sorry, one thing before I let you go. Nope, I noticed Gandalf walks like both hips, his back and neck are all hurting him.
Oh, I noticed all of the hobbits like, look like they're
decrepit.
Constantly limping. Like, I don't know what it is about the animators, but they can't just make people walk normally.
I wrote Bilbo and Sam, their feet and ankles are massive. And everybody else has like normal looking legs comparatively. And it's just, like we've been saying, the animation for certain characters is just so strange in some instances because it's not universal. Like not all hobbits look the same, which I know they don't, but to the point of some of them look very different than other hobbits.
I really think a lot of this did come down to, you mentioned rotoscope was a budgetary thing. I think it just came down to budgets. It's like, it's way easier to copy the same body and face model for Merry and Pippin and Frodo and just change the hair color. Like, if you want to have a bunch of different looking hobbits, you can do that in one scene, which is the party scene. But then for the other hobbits that need to be in the rest of the movie, nope, they're going to be the same. Just change the hair.
Mm-hmm. What do you have on Moria?
So I was like, I wrote down, couldn't even do Chamber of Marzlebul. Like, yeah,
it's like an open.
It's an open area.
Room.
Yeah, it just looks like a kind of a large thoroughfare. It's not a specific chamber with the very relatively iconic beam of sunlight coming down.
Yeah, why would the dwarves bury their king in just the middle of a hallway?
Yeah,
in a tomb. It doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make that didn't make, and you didn't need to do it. Like, you're animating it all anyway. Just animate a room. It also then the geography of the orc fight doesn't make any sense. Because bar those doors, but keep the east doors open. It's like, well, we don't even know where east is, and it looks like this is just open to everywhere. So why do you care about one doorway versus another? He says the line, "We can't be trapped. Keep one set of doors open." Yeah. And it's like, but you're not in a room. Well, it's like the person who wrote the script read the book because that's roughly what it is in the book. But then the people who animated it didn't, and they're just like, oh, it's you're underground. Okay, well, here we'll do a big chasm over here and some pillars, and it goes off into the darkness. Like, no, it's a sunlit chamber.
Did you just say chasm?
I did. How do you say it? Chasm?
Chasm?
How do you say Eterus?
Way to misdirect.
Yep.
I appreciate that.
So
I will say they did pronounce Edoras in a really weird way, where the moment they said it in the movie, it took me a second to be like, what word did they just say? And I was like, oh, Edoras. That's where they're going.
I think they also do, is it minus Tirith or Minas Tirith?
I think they say minus.
They say minus, but I think it's Minas.
It is Minas.
Yeah.
Galadriel pronounces her husband's name's Celeborn.
Oh, yeah.
Celeborn.
It just, and that is in the book itself. There's a pronunciation guide, right?
Tolkien tells you how to pronounce these things.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is where I first wrote, and this is the first place we see orcs, and my immediate reaction was, I hate orcs suck.
They looked awful.
The visual representation is terrible. They take regular actors in some sort of costume, and then through rotoscoping, they animate in big white teeth
and
red eyes, right? And that's what we get. That's the only, and because of the whole rotoscoping process, everything else about them then becomes less defined. So they're just these blurry, vaguely animalistic beings that are.
It's even like the actors were wearing like gorilla masks.
Yes. And that becomes very clear in the Helm's Deep scene, where we get a lot more straight. Yeah. It looks like chimpanzee masks, basically.
Mm-hmm. Like they went to Planet of the Apes and just raided the.
Yeah. And honestly, they may have done that. Like old Star Trek, the original series,
mm-hmm.
Like they really just were like, okay, what costumes do we have here at the backlot was it CBS? It's like, oh, well, we've got some stuff from when we did Julius Caesar. It's like, okay, cool. How about this? The Enterprise discovers a planet all based on ancient Rome. And like, that's how they did it. Cause like that show also had a notoriously really slim budget, but here it's so bad. And then
I was gonna say, do you want to say anything else about the Balrog now, or did we get a piece in earlier?
It looked terrible. There was no foreshadowing of what this thing is and why it's important and they don't even establish that it was what drove the dwarves away. Like, we get no backstory about Moria, which was one of the reasons that Moria was interesting as a location. I think we don't even. Oh, when Bilbo gives Frodo the mithril shirt, he doesn't explain that it's mithril. He just says this was made by the elves, or made by the dwarves, or made by, I can't remember who. He just says who made it. And then we get later Gimli explaining that it was mithril silver that came to mind, but they don't talk about what it is or why it's important. They don't say that it contains the light of the Palantir contains the light of the Silmaril, and it was forged through a tree getting hit by lightning while an elf felled a Balrog. Haven't you heard of the roots of the Hifalgir?
Yeah, and is this the same Balrog?
We'll find out.
We'll find out in a later
What's his
episode.
backstory?
Yeah.
You know, what's the Balrog's backstory? Where did he come from? Where did he go to high school?
Yeah. So this isn't about the Balrog's looks, but in the scene where Gandalf is fighting the Balrog, Glamdring breaks.
I wrote that. Glamdring breaks! !
And then all of a sudden he has Glamdring again when he comes back as Gandalf the White.
And this is where I was watching and I was like, okay, Glamdring breaks. That doesn't make any sense. At that point, though, to get real with everybody for a second, I didn't know that this also included the scenes from the Two Towers. So it's in the same film. We have a flashback to the earlier moments when Gandalf fell and continued to fight the Balrog using a sword that the very same movie established as having
broke.
Established as having broken?
Break.
Established as having been broken in twain.
Having snapped.
Yes. It no longer one piece make.
The sword. Glamdring.
The faux hammer.
Oh my God. You just reminded me of our conversation last week of people being able to recognize swords from thousands of years ago.
Yes, indeed.
Anyway, glam drink breaks. I will when they leave Moria and they're like recovering outside. Aragorn in this movie has a line that I actually really liked, even though it doesn't really jive with the whole idea of there's always hope.
Mm-hmm.
But he says, "We will do without hope. There is always vengeance." Like I thought
Oh yeah.
that was a pretty cool line.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, but it doesn't really track for the whole theme of Lord of the Rings, which is always in the face of great odds. There's always a minuscule amount of hope that we will
Yeah.
succeed, and that's what we're fighting for. The idea that Aragorn is like, oh yeah, hope doesn't matter. We can always just try to get vengeance. That seems kind of out of character, but I actually liked the line. So
The line was good.
that's what it is.
I think they did a good job with Aragorn. He's more truthful. He's more true to the books than the Peter Jackson version of Aragorn was. And there, obviously, I think we've discussed it before in our Amazon Lord of the Rings conversations about how Jackson's Aragorn needed to do the arc of embracing his identity and becoming the king in the final chapter to make that more dramatic and effective. This Aragorn, Narsil is reforged, although they don't really talk about it. And a lot of his indecision comes forward. And the fact that he's reluctant to kind of replace Gandalf. And I think they did a good job with that in him taking over immediately following the supposed death of Gandalf. And then later on, when they're trying to decide which way to go toward Minas Tirith or to go to Mordor. And those are taken directly, or that specific, his trouble with that decision and some of the journey along the river that really tests his leadership. That's straight from the book. And I think they did a decent enough job with that here.
We go from recovering after Moria to immediately in the presence of Galadriel and Celeborn.
There's like no buildup to why,
No.
like what's important about Lothlorien, why it's special, why it might be dangerous.
We get a brief conversation between Aragorn and Boromir where Boromir is like, the Golden Woods is like haunted and all this stuff, like we do in Jackson's trilogy as well. But yeah, it's just like, okay, we're going there. Boom, we're there. Let's talk to Galadriel. I wrote in
Speaking
this
of
scene,
Golden Wood, we get no establishing shot of what Lorien looks like. Like that was a huge part of what Lorien is supposed to be, is this beautiful place kind of beyond time, kind of separate from the world. The golden tree is Galas. What's it called? I don't remember the Elvish name for the kind of the central area of settlement, but we get none of that. It's just immediately to people standing on a platform talking to each other.
Mm-hmm. And in that scene, I wrote Galadriel's eyes are freaky as well. Like we mentioned earlier, they're enormous blue eyes. And I wrote, Bakshi seems to not know how to get the eyes right. And yeah, like I was saying earlier, like every character, their eyes are crazy. A lot of times their eyes are like super wide, just always in shock, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah.
We get a little bit of a montage scene of people doing stuff. You get Gimli and Legolas practicing archery. Why does Gimli need to practice archery? Unclear. We also get Boromir sharpening his sword on just a random rock lying on the ground, which, okay, fine. You want to portray them sharpening the rocks, but
did you notice that Boromir's sword throughout is so like divoted? Like there's so many like chunks missing from his sword.
I noticed that. And then in the very first scene where you see his sword is the Watcher, where he is hacking at the tentacles, and his sword is wavy, like it's serpentine. Which is a style of sword,
which would have been cool.
But I mean, not at all a style of sword that Tolkien ever mentions in the Lord of the Rings canon. And also, I don't think it's really that accurate for, if you want to talk about like kind of Dark Age, Middle Ages inspired settings. I think that's much more of like a fantastical element type thing.
But we zoom in later, and his sword is
it's all hacked to pieces.
Yeah, it's straight, but it's missing a whole bunch of chunks. So it's like the design of the sword switched at some point as well. I will say that's another one of those scenes that it looks like Jackson was paying homage to, if we're going to be nice and not call him a hack. But that scene where in the animated movie, it's Aragorn is like play fighting with Frodo.
Yeah.
But in the movies, it's Jackson fighting with, or not, it's Jackson. It's Boromir fighting with Merry and Pippin.
Yeah, which I think it actually was Boromir fighting with Merry, like teaching Merry and Pippin how to fight.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
in the book.
Yeah, yep. But I mean, I like those scenes. It established, had we had a second animated film, that Gimli and Legolas are becoming friends. The two of them are hanging out in Lothlorien. I would have been cool with that.
Yeah, but I mean, in the book, that's almost entirely due to Gimli's respect and love and adoration for Galadriel. Yeah. Which I actually really enjoyed those scenes out in my recent reread. Like Galadriel actually comes off. She comes out looking really good because she kind of chides the other elves, including Celeborn, for their treatment of Gimli.
Yeah.
And I was like, and she empathizes with him. She's like, how would you feel if you were brought, blindfolded into the middle of the dwarf kingdom? Like, and it was really cool. And then of course we have the, his professed love and the beauty.
The Silmarillion backstory of the request of hair, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So the Fëanor asking for hair, and she said no, and he only wanted one strand. Gimli asks for a strand of hair, and she gives him 3.
Yes.
So just the whole the respect is reciprocal in this.
Yeah, the whole Galadriel stuff in this, the animated film was really weird because we get the initial meeting, and then we get the mirror scene, and the mirror scene is pretty much straight from the book, very similar to how it was portrayed in the Jackson film, and then that's it. The next scene is them, the Fellowship, leaving on the boat, on the boats rather, and that's it. We don't get the gifts. We don't get any of the kind of not the foreshadowing, but like the sharing of wisdom and counsel. We get none of that.
But we do get the Argonath. So we see them sailing down the river. Aragorn mentions the Argonath, Isildur and Anarion. The next scene is them trying to decide what to do.
We don't get any indication, however, that their journey is being followed either by Gollum or by orcs or the winged Nazgul. We
do in Moria.
In Moria, we get the 2 eyes, but we don't get anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, Frodo sees eyes. And that's when we get the reference later that Frodo knows that someone's been following them. At least Frodo has been aware of it this whole time.
Yeah. In the books, Aragorn is too.
Yeah.
That Gollum was following them kind of on a floating log, which eventually we get, but just not at the point. Now, we don't get it at any point until the river journey is over.
Mm-hmm. Then we get the scene of Boromir trying to take the ring from Frodo. Boromir gets taken out by 7 arrows. Pretty gnarly.
I wrote that he pulled 3 arrows directly from his heart, including like the head of the arrow too. Like famously, when you're hit with an arrow, you break off the shaft so that the weight
leave it
doesn't cause more damage, but everything else stays in until it can be well tended to. He just rips 3 arrows directly out of his heart.
Yeah. And I noticed that too. And then I also noticed that when he goes to attack the orcs, there's an open wound through his back. So these arrows went clear through him, and he pulled them all the way from like protruding through his back all the way out through his chest. Which is pretty intense.
If anybody wants a really gruesome but interesting detail of an arrow wound, there is an explanation of the wound and the treatment to Henry V, which he received during, I think it was actually a minor uprising in England prior to the 100 years, his involvement in the 100 Years' War, and that details what a war arrow does and how to treat it.
Okay, moving on. The Merry and Pippin are taken. Frodo and Sam leave per the books and Jackson's trilogy, and then we get.
I had a note here. I'm sorry to interrupt, but like the scene of the 2 of them together getting into the boat and leaving, it doesn't resonate at all because we don't have anything about their relationship over the course of the film.
Oh, for sure.
We don't have Frodo and Sam confiding in one another or having a relationship. They're just always there, and there is no chance for them to see prior to this Sam's dedication to Frodo or Frodo's respect and appreciation for Sam, like the scenes in when Frodo's recovering in Rivendell. I guess we do get Sam kind of expressing concern over Frodo, but just it's done so poorly that you really don't get the sense that these are people who respect and maybe even not romantically, but love each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Platonic love. And maybe more emotional love and romantic. You never know. I always get the vibe between Frodo and Sam. It's a little bit more romantic than people are willing to believe, but it is what it is.
I think that is an artifact of a modern audience watching the portrayal of the relationship. I don't think Tolkien intended that at all.
Okay, boomer. As Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas decided they are going to chase down Merry and Pippin, there's one really funny scene when they're doing the chase. I know what
you're going to say.
They, for some reason, just animate Aragorn tripping
like in slow motion.
Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, like this to me began. It was just a series of. Okay, so they have the slow motion tripping, which why do you even need that? And then you have just these incredibly long, boring scenes with the Uruk-hai. It's just cut this shit out of your movie and give us something that's interesting.
Yeah, I laughed so hard when I saw that scene. I was like, there's one thing, like if it's live action and the actor trips and you're like, okay, but everything else is so good, we're just going to leave it in. You made the conscious choice to just have one of your three animated characters trip. Like, why? What are you trying to portray with that trip? I have no idea. But it was very, very funny. We skip around. We see the Rohirrim killing the Uruk-hai in that weird rotoscope, just BS that I can't stand. We see Treebeard, who unfortunately didn't get a whole lot of screen time because he would have been featured in the second film much more. Yeah.
He also he just shows up on screen with no introduction. There's no scene of Frodo and Pippin and Treebeard actually encountering each other. You hear his voice.
Yeah. And
they hear his voice, and then they immediately cut to him walking, holding the two of them, and they reference a prior conversation that we didn't see.
We saw when Merry and Pippin are alone in the forest, we hear a voice. That's Treebeard.
Oh, yeah, no, I know. It's like,
and hang on, yeah. But
okay.
They also say when he's holding them, we didn't even recognize you from a tree. So I think they're trying to say that like Treebeard was like there stationary, and then he was there the entire time and then just picked them up and proceeded forth.
Yeah, I mean, just compare the introduction of Treebeard in the animated movie to how it's done in Peter Jackson's Two Towers. It's like, oh yeah, you Peter actually Jackson's get this like, oh yeah, like this is the first thing that he does is kill an orc, and then he picks up the two hobbits. So you get the sense of like, okay, this guy is dangerous. He probably doesn't like orcs, but what's he going to do with hobbits? And there's a little bit of suspense there. And here we don't get any of that. Which again, I understand you're cutting stuff for time. Mm-hmm. There are other considerations when it comes to that. Like, why would you try to push together 2 novels worth of material into one animated film? Just make one good film, and then maybe you'll get money to make a second. Anyway, and then I didn't really care for Treebeard's animation. I was going to
say I actually liked.
No, you did?
The animation of Treebeard, and I liked with the detail of when you watch the Two Towers, Jackson's movie, when Treebeard walks, he kind of has like these roots on the ends of his toes that kind of go into the ground. In this animated movie, every time Treebeard takes a step, his foot like goes into the ground. And I thought that was a pretty cool animation or idea of what it's like for an Ent to walk.
Okay. I will say this, that I, having recently reread the chapters introducing Treebeard and showing Merry and Pippin spending time with him and the other Ents, I do not know how I would animate an Ent. The I would say more cartoonish way of doing it was, I think, preferable to any sort of like weird rotoscoping type, like, grafting animation on top of a human actor underneath. That would have obviously been terrible. I like the Jackson portrayal. I like the Jackson Ents. I think, and I don't know if I heard this criticism at the times, that they're like a little too tree-like in some ways. Like the Ents were, and that's the thing. Again, I've read them recently, and I still don't have a clear idea in my mind of, are these like are these giants that have tree-like features, or are these giant trees that are animated, like that are alive in a certain sense?
I think they're giants that have tree-like features, but
Yes.
that's open to interpretation, like how
Yes.
much the features, and that's what like this animated Ent of Treebeard to me looks a lot like one of the Ents that Jackson uses in Two Towers, like that short, stocky.
Think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Pine tree Ent. He looks a lot like the one that they use in this movie, but
okay, so we get that.
then we get the scene at Edoras.
One thing we did skip over was Gollum and Sam and Frodo.
I literally have no notes on any of that. My view on the animation of Gollum is it's fine. I think he looks more like a Hobbit than the animated Hobbit version of Gollum.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more believable to me that
he's more skeletal.
Yeah, that Frodo could turn into that.
Yeah.
Whereas the other one, you're like basically changing your character race or whatever you want to do.
He's a toad.
Yeah.
He's a toad creature. The thing about this Gollum that jumped out to me was that he looks unfinished. His animation is very plain. Like you can see his bones, but there's no veins, there's no nothing. Oh my God. Though, did you in the prologue, they have Smeagol kind of after he murders Deagle and steals a ring and he goes under the mountain, then he comes out after Bilbo recovers it. Do you remember his portrayal?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, no, so it's all silhouetted because it's the shadow figures, whatever. But it's a human actor wearing like a really terrible, maybe Einstein wig with hair coming off the two sides of his head, and then he's got like Creature from the Black Lagoon finger, like long finger claw type things, and it's so goofy. I wonder if like, okay, we can't rotoscope that. Like we're gonna have to just animate this thing fully. And then here's a bone to pick with pedantic Sam. They open with Frodo and Sam moving through Emyn Muil, having just kind of rappelled down the cliff with the elven rope. Famously, in the book and in the extended edition, the rope basically unties itself and Sam coils it back up after having expressed kind of regret over having to leave this rope behind. He doesn't have to leave it behind. He takes it with him. In this animated version, they rappel down the cliff face. They mention, good thing you got that rope from the elves, and then they immediately move on. And I wrote down, they just left it. They just left the rope. There's no scene of them getting the rope back. Cut to after they confront Gollum.
Tie him up.
Sam just pulls out his rope again and ties him up. I was like, you go to all the trouble of establishing the rope. You cut out the scene of him getting the rope back kind of mysteriously, magically, and then you show him having rope again. Like, what's the point? Anyway.
Yeah, there's no one like looking at the scenes going, well, this isn't really lining up here, guys. Maybe we need to fill in some gaps.
Similar to that, talking about that, during the escape of Merry and Pippin, we get name drops for both Ugluk and Grishnak without having established who they are or the fact that one of them is loyal to Saruman and one of them is loyal to Sauron. We don't get any of that. And then kind of out of the blue, you get Merry and Pippin pretending like they have the ring, which is from the book. But in the book, you get us insight into their thought process, which just does not come across at all in the animation. So it just sounds really weird.
Yeah, in the animation, it's like Merry just decides that he's going to do it, and then Pippin's like, "Oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to do it too."
Yeah,
that's a little weird.
Yeah, because they know they have to like stall for time and like distract him basically. Otherwise, he could kill them or he could take them without them being rescued. Which eventually it works, and he's killed, and they're able to escape. All right,
you want to cut to Edoras? Because I'll be honest. After, like, basically from Edoras until the end of the movie, the only thing I kept thinking was, I hate rotoscope. I hate rotoscope over and over again.
This movie, I was begging for it to be over at this starting very soon after this point. Yeah. Yeah.
So my last notes, these are the two notes for the entirety of the film we have left to discuss. The first one is Grima a hobbit?
Yes, I thought the same thing. He's so short,
so tiny.
Yeah.
Compared to every other man or human in the film, he's so small.
Also, there's several things about Grima. He was stroking Theoden's face really
Yeah.
strangely, which I don't recall that being in the book. Like
No, it wasn't.
Grima, no, it's certainly. I mean, Grima is a creepy guy. I think the Peter Jackson movies do a really good job of portraying that with Brad Dourif.
Oh yeah.
Um, I I
No,
almost thought
we need to take a second. Brad Dourif appreciation moment. He's a phenomenal actor and perfectly cast as Grima Wormtongue. But what's the Western show that he was in as the Doctor?
Deadwood.
Deadwood. He is so good in Deadwood as well.
Never seen it.
So,
That was a complete guess.
oh, dude, you got to watch that.
Mm-hmm.
Critical Role has a very good mini campaign.
Oh, Undeadwood.
Undeadwood.
Yeah. I heard of that, but I haven't watched it because I haven't seen Deadwood. On Grima as well, though. Did you think they kind of based his character's portrayal on Vincent Price?
Remind me of who Vincent Price is.
The horror movie actor from the 50s and 60s, Mask of the Red Death. He was in the original. Wasn't called Omega Man. That was I Am Legend.
Oh, he's got the mustache. Yeah,
it was the mustache and then kind of the eyes and the nose and just the overall like creepiness. I think the Simpsons would reference Vincent Price a decent amount, which is
he looks like a Vincent Price mixed with LeFou from Beauty and the Beast.
Okay,
you know what I mean? Like the two, if you combine them together, you would get Grima from animated Lord of the Rings.
So that was really weird. They skipped a lot of really important stuff with the Rohan scenes. There's no encounter between Éomer and the three hunters in the aftermath of the battle. There's no explanation for how they get the horses that they're then riding on.
Because the three of them just show up in the forest.
Yeah, you immediately cut to them in the forest looking at the tracks of Treebeard. Then they meet Gandalf, and they're like, we got to go to Edoras, and let me give you some exposition on the way there. Then they're immediately there. We get the weird, creepy Grima, Gandalf kind of freeing Theoden from the influence, although it's a little bit less well portrayed.
Much less well portrayed.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Jackson movies go a bit beyond what's in the base material in the book. They make it better though. That's one of the times in the movies where I go, I think I like that more than what's in the book. Yes.
Because it's legit like possession. Like Saruman is possessing him.
Yes.
Not like Theoden, like this not amazing king, but this guy who's like a ruler of men who just for some reason is tired and just like falls victim to bad advice. That doesn't track well for me. And it makes more sense to me that Theoden might be possessed by Saruman. And I like that way more.
Yeah, I agree. The way that they did it in Jackson was an improvement. I will say an improvement. Éowyn is basically a reskin of Galadriel, exact same model as far as I can tell, just wearing something different. And she has 0 lines.
I think she might say something.
Say she has 1 line, but
it's very brief.
Yeah, far fewer lines than in the book at that point.
They were saving her for the second movie.
Yeah, well, yeah, and then I only have a few other fake beards and rotoscope was one of my notes. Like Gandalf and Theoden have the actors who portray them for the rotoscoping scenes are wearing fake beards, and through the rotoscope and the animation, you can see that they are fake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my last note for the entire movie is just a lot of the orcs at Helm's Deep look like Tusken Raiders.
Yes, I thought the exact same thing.
They're wearing like these robes with like hoods and like masks and stuff. But then the other half of the orcs look like guys in gorilla suits. So it's really strange to see the two.
And there's no, I mean, again, I don't think ultimately it doesn't matter that much, but there's no kind of wild men from Dunland.
That doesn't really matter.
It didn't really matter in the Jackson films either, except for like they have the one introductory scene of them like burning the Westfold, which is in the extended editions more so. But they give Saruman the speech in this animated movie about the men of Rohan kind of treated you poorly and drove you out, and I maybe even say enslaved you. But like he's giving that speech to orcs
Who he created.
and it doesn't fit. Like the speech that he's giving should be given to wild men, and in the extended editions it was given to wild men, and they have a much, in the book especially, they're more central in the fight at Helm's Deep. That was a little weird. This is really where the rotoscoping just kind of went just a bridge too far for me, and it was so distracting how dark and indistinct everything was. It's like they were fighting shadows, or it was like shadows fighting shadows, except for when you had animated Aragorn or Legolas or Gimli,
who were properly animated.
Yes.
Like we said in the beginning, if the traditional animation would have been used throughout, I think my opinion of the movie would be much different.
Yeah, yes, very much so. A couple of other final notes here. In the book, Éomer defies an order of Theoden, but is imprisoned at Edoras and is freed when Gandalf and the three hunters come to Edoras and remove the influence of Grima from Theoden. It is then that Gandalf, Theoden, and the people of Edoras, the warriors of Edoras, go to the Fords of Isen, or toward the Fords of Isen, and then eventually go to Helm's Deep. And it's on that ride that Gandalf leaves and goes and finds Arkenbrand, who is the Marshal of the Westfold, and then shows up at the very end of the battle to kind of save the day or end the threat once and for all. It is in this movie where Gandalf departs from Edoras to find Éomer and bring Éomer and his men to the Battle of Helm's Deep to save the day, as it was in the Jackson films. Do you have an opinion, Sean, about the changes here? We have two movie adaptations where Éomer and Gandalf show up at the end, and none of that happened in the book.
I mean, I personally prefer it without, what is it, Arkenbrand?
Arkenbrand, yeah.
I prefer it without him because it's just another character that's not really needed, and Éomer can fulfill that same purpose.
Yeah.
And they get around it by saying, oh, instead of being in prison, we're just going to like
banished or whatever.
Yeah, banish you from the kingdom. And then you could just have Éomer fill that role, because Arkenbrand, he dies in the books, doesn't he?
Not at Helm's Deep.
Okay.
It's Hama who dies at Helm's Deep, the head of the Theoden's guard.
That's right. But I like it. And it's just another character that you don't need. Now, a character that I wish they would use, and I wish Jackson would have used, was the Prince of Tol
Amroth?
Imrahil. I wish they would have used Imrahil, because then, like, you get the idea in Jackson's trilogy, and specifically Jackson's trilogy, that Gondor is basically just Minas Tirith and Osgiliath and like the Rangers of Ithilien. But in reality, like, the territory that they control is so much more vast.
Yeah.
And it would have been cool to see like more of the outskirts of the kingdom arriving just in time to save the capital. You know what I mean?
And it's been a while since I've read Return of the King. I'm working my way through it, or soon will be working my way through it. But that is what Aragorn did. Like the Paths of the Dead were a way to get to the other side of Gondor, between the mountains and the sea. And then he kind of rallies the men of southern Gondor and shows up in time where they attack the Corsairs and stop the Corsairs. But then that's where the Army of the Dead is released. And the rest of the force that remains are the men of southern Gondor. And they show up at the end to, finish the Battle of Pelennor. So yeah, we don't get a lot of that. And then the Prince of Dol Amroth, Imrahil, is important in the rest of the story, because he's like one of the people that kind of pledges for Aragorn and supports Aragorn becoming the king, which was, you could say, kind of critical. It was more than just a sword and the ownership of the Palantir. Couple final notes I have. We have the scene of Frodo and Sam and Gollum hiding from the Fell Beast and the winged Nazgul, and we get the kind of a Petrodactyl type Fell Beast.
Yep.
And then I just wrote Gollum sucks. Like I didn't. His animation was boring and plain, and then I thought the voice acting was not great.
Yep.
And maybe
I'm
that's just
with you there.
because everything pales in comparison to Andy Serkis, but this
Dude,
was not good.
if you want to see Andy Serkis's best role, watch Andor.
Yeah, I still haven't done that.
I know. I keep telling you. This is probably like the fourth time on this podcast that I've told you
That's
need to watch
true.
it.
That's true. Yeah, and then the end is kind of interesting because I think they say something about how and Gandalf and his friends rid evil from the face of Middle Earth. But
And
that
then
happens in the second story.
yeah, no, they say that, and then they say, and in part two,
Yeah.
or they insinuate that there will be a part two, and it's like, well, if evil's gone, why is there going to be a part two?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, I thought compared. So if we look at how Lord of the Rings content and Return of the King Lord of the Rings and Two Towers content was portrayed, there's a lot more time spent on the Lord of the Rings stuff, and the Two Towers content was really just rushed through.
oh
very
yeah,
much to the detriment of the overall story.
I'd say the animated movie was probably like 75% Fellowship of the Ring, 25% Two Towers. And
Yeah.
granted, the Two Towers is the smallest of the three novels or three books, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like they took the entire Two Towers book and shaved it down to about 30 minutes.
Yeah,
Which is you're skipping a lot in that.
Yeah, and a lot of what they chose to include were extended, just scenes of nothing happening for like just in kind of indiscriminate fighting at Helm's Deep, or orcs marching and marching and marching, or people standing around waiting. And it's like if you have a 3-hour movie to portray that, and Helm's Deep is the second or is like the final 45 minutes, then you can have kind of the ominous, suspenseful people waiting, and you watch the army grow in the deep. But here, this is a 2-hour movie. Helm's Deep is the final 5 minutes, and you're spending 30 seconds watching the orcs march down the hill. Cut that.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, I think we're spent.
That's all I've got. That's all of the energy and emotional capital that I can put towards this.
Yeah.
Recap. Overall, Sam, out of 10
stars,
10 stars, what would you give Ralph Bakshi's 1978 animated The Lord of the Rings?
I give it 3 stars for what it was trying to do, and 1 star for its execution.
For an average of 2?
Well, let's say 4. This gets a 40%. It fails, but it wasn't an utter absolute failure, and it was something that was it was worth the effort to attempt to do this. Maybe if they'd had more money and they could have gone full animation instead of the rotoscoping, the final result would have been something that we can look back on fondly. But yeah, this was a failed effort, failed execution, and yeah, just bad filmmaking. How about you? What are your final grades for the animated Lord of the Rings?
I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10.
Okay.
We watched it, so you didn't have to.
Yeah, please don't watch the animated Lord of the Rings if you have choices.
No, I'll say if you're interested and you're curious, give it a go. I wouldn't say that I'm upset that I watched it. I'm happy I watched it. I think this is one where I'm happy I watched it by myself and I didn't have Carly watch it with me. Mm-hmm. Usually all of the stuff that we review, I'll have Carly watch. But this is one that I think she probably wouldn't have enjoyed at all. And I'm happy that I watched this one solo.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, if you're curious, give it a go. If you're a huge Lord of the Rings fan, I feel like you can't say that you are without having watched this movie. Because now there's like I feel like I can contribute to conversations where someone says, "Oh, have you seen the Bakshi Lord of the Rings?" Now I can have a conversation with that person who's also a Tolkien fan. So yeah, before we incorrectly said we were going to watch the Bakshi Hobbit, which doesn't exist. So even you and I, the layman Tolkien fans, the average Tolkien fans, we're getting some stuff wrong here at the beginning, but now we can correct.
Did I say the Ralph Bakshi Hobbit? I don't think I said the Ralph Bakshi Hobbit.
Oh, you did. Let's.
Let's.
I'm gonna insert a clip of you saying.
Okay. If this turns into me saying the Ralph Bakshi, then I deserve it. But
oh man, yeah, every time
I will say this, I have certainly in the past referred interchangeably to Ralph Bakshi, Rankin Bass, and somebody once corrected me on it. And so. And this was the first time I'd ever seen the entirety of the animated Lord of the Rings. So yeah, there's definitely some holes to, so to speak, in our record as Tolkien completists. But
we keep doing this in this episode, and it's just making more editing for me. So I don't know why we keep saying, "Oh, I'm going to edit this in or edit this out" every time we keep doing this. But I'm digging myself my own hole. It's okay. We have Monday off. #
just imagine
MLK.
Just imagine if this were a live stream.
Yes, it'd be a lot more difficult. But yeah, I guess if you're interested in a live stream and want to see Sam and I in person talk about this stuff, let us know in an email and or comment or message on our Facebook page, Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things.
Yeah, we didn't do any plugs.
No, we didn't. You can email us at elvesringsnerdythings@gmail.com. Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. Yep. Go ahead.
Well, we have the season 2 of Critical Role, The Legend of Vox Machina, debuts this week. I think probably midnight Thursday, Friday. We will be watching. I think they're going to come out with the first 3 episodes.
Yeah, if they do what they did in season 1, they will release 3 episodes at a time. It airs January 20th, which I believe is Friday, so it might be Thursday at midnight.
Mm-hmm.
It will be released. This episode will drop Wednesday, the 18th, I believe. And yeah, thank you for listening to us. This was our discussion on Ralph Bakshi's The Animated Lord of the Rings from 1978. Yeah, that's it.
That's all we got, everybody. Go in peace.
See ya.
Bye.